The wind howled like a living thing across the Wyoming plains. It tugged at the loose boards of the Dry Creek Ranch's cookhouse and pushed angry clouds across the frozen sky. Snow spat sideways. Thunder, distant but crawling closer, rolled over the hills like the growl of something ancient and awake. Nora Belle Whitmore stepped down from the buckboard, her gloved hand gripping the cracked rail. Her boots sank into a crust of brittle snow. She stood still, letting the wind claw at her shawl, her black morning dress snapping at her heels. The stagecoach driver didn't wait for thanks. The moment her feet hit the ground, he gave the horses a quick lash and vanished down the muddy road. In her hand, she held a folded letter, the ink blotted from too much reading and rereading. Her mother's script was weak, barely legible. "I'm not long for this world," it had said. "Come home if you can. They still need a cook." The ranch loomed ahead, rough-edged and weather-worn. Corrals were half empty, their fences bowed with the weight of frost. Beyond them, a wide barn stood like a sentinel against the wind, its doors shuddering on their hinges. And there, off to the side, a long, low bunkhouse where the men stayed. No welcome committee. No horses saddled. Only silence and wind. She squared her shoulders and started toward the house. Inside, the scent of lye soap and damp wood greeted her. Her mother lay curled under a wool blanket, pale and small against the ticking mattress. Her eyes fluttered open when Nora Belle touched her forehead. "You came," her mother whispered. "You asked." Tears glistened at the corners of her mother's eyes, but she blinked them away. "I can't feed him no more. Not since the fever hit." She coughed, the sound dry and rattling. "But they need hot food. Cold like this? You know what happens without it." Nora Belle nodded slowly. "I'll do it." Her mother's eyes widened in panic. "Nora Belle, no, he won't like it. The men won't. They're used to someone quiet. I just work. No talk." "I'm not here to talk," Nora Belle said. "Just to survive." A day later, before dawn, she stood in the ranch kitchen, sleeves rolled up, fingers numb. The stove wouldn't light. The wood was damp, poorly chopped. She struck the match a third time, whispered a curse under her breath, and finally got the fire to catch. A single flame crackled, then bloomed into warmth. Nora Belle exhaled slowly, as though she'd been holding her breath since the day her husband died. By 6, the first ranch hand came through the door, shaking snow from his coat and stomping his boot. His beard was thick, eyes narrowed with suspicion. He didn't speak, just looked her up and down and poured himself coffee from a dented tin pot. 3 more followed, then 6. A dozen by the time the biscuits were out of the firebox and the bacon hissed on the skillet. They didn't greet her. Just sat. Waited. She served them in silence. Whispers passed like smoke. One man, broad-shouldered, pockmarked with a perpetual sneer, spoke just loud enough for her to hear. "Widow, huh? Wonder what she's cooking, meat or pity." The others chuckled. Nora Belle met his gaze with calm fire. "Eat fast. I'm not warming up your seconds." Another chuckle. This time, from a different corner, Luis, a quiet, dark-eyed man with a scar under his right cheekbone. He nodded once, barely noticeable. She took it as a victory. The morning passed in smoke and flour, the constant clatter of tin plates and boot heels. At noon, while scrubbing pans, she heard the door open again. This time, the room fell quiet. Silas McKenna didn't speak as he entered. Tall, broad, with a thick coat and a wide-brimmed hat dusted in snow, he moved like a man used to being listened to. His boots echoed on the wood floor as he approached the serving table. Nora Belle turned toward him, wiping her hands on her apron. "I'm Nora Belle Whitmore," she said, voice steady. "Helen's daughter." He nodded once. No greeting. "She's too sick to keep going. I'll be filling in." Silas looked her over without expression. "You're not a cook." "I am now." A long pause. "Men eat early. 5 sharp. You get 1 week." He glanced around the room, gaze flicking across every face. "She fails, we hire out." The men didn't respond. Silas turned and left, just as silent as he came. By the end of the first day, Nora Bell's back ached and her hands were blistered. She hadn't sat down since sunrise. The sky outside was bruised purple, heavy with snow. She returned to the small room where her mother lay, wrapped in furs. Nora Bell set a bowl of stew beside her and sat. "You made it through day one," her mother said, voice faint. "Barely." Crack from the stove. The wind outside screamed louder. "That rancher, Silas." Nora Bell hesitated. "He looks like a man that's lost everything." Her mother coughed, nodded. "He has. Wife and boy. Gone in one of those raids. Before you came back from the war." Nora Bell looked away. The word war settled like ash in her throat. She didn't say anything for a long while. When she finally lay down that night, on a cot beside the kitchen, the silence rang louder than the storm. Her mind played over every moment. The sneers. The scalded fingers. The way Silas hadn't questioned her cooking, hadn't even finished his stew. Tomorrow would be worse. It always was. Just before sleep took her, the door creaked open again. A figure stood there, Luis, holding a bundle of firewood. He said nothing, just placed it near the stove, nodded again, and left. Nora Bell didn't smile. But her eyes stayed open longer than they should have. The wind didn't stop howling. And neither did she. The cold arrived like a thief in the night, silent and cruel. By morning, snow covered everything. Not the soft kind that dusts rooftops like powdered sugar, but the wet, heavy kind that breaks tree limbs and seals doors shut. The Dry Creek Ranch was no longer just quiet, it was cut off. No wagons in or out. No resupply. The wind keened like a blade along the eaves of the bunkhouse, and inside the cookhouse, the fire guttered low, struggling against the draft. Nora Bell rose before first light. Her fingers, stiff and raw from the day before, trembled as she reached for her shawl. Every joint protested. The air bit through the thin windows like fangs. She pushed through the kitchen door and found the pantry shelves half empty. Dried beans. Cornmeal. Salt pork going gray around the edges. Not enough to last the week. She exhaled once, slowly. Then moved. By the time the men arrived, eyes red from sleeplessness, boots caked in frozen mud, Nora Bell had a pot of biscuit stew bubbling, thickened with potato water and a few pinches of flour. It wasn't elegant, but it was hot. She slid the bowls across the rough wooden table like cards in a high-stakes game. One by one, they took their meals without comment, though their eyes lingered longer now. There was something in the way she moved, calculated but calm, as though survival itself depended on every stir of the spoon. Bo grumbled under his breath, but not loud enough for her to hear the words. Luis, ever silent, helped her chop more wood without being asked. His shoulder was bleeding from a splinter the size of a knife blade, but he worked anyway. Nora Bell tied it off with a strip of linen and didn't ask questions. He didn't offer any. When the storm worsened, some of the cattle strayed from the enclosure. The fence had collapsed under the weight of snow, and the men rode out in groups to recover what they could. Silas went with them. Nora Bell remained behind, tending the fire and reboiling stale water for tea. Time blurred. Days passed. Her mother's fever broke, then returned. Nora Bell nursed her with broth and soaked cloths and whispered lullabies from their old home in Kansas, verses that barely made sense anymore but kept the memories intact. One evening, after the wind had torn a shutter clean off its hinges, Nora Bell found herself standing by the stove, sleeves rolled to the elbow, her skin shining with sweat despite the cold. The stew was nearly done. She could feel it in the way the spoon moved, thicker now, heartier. She stirred slowly, then paused. A shadow moved behind her. She turned. Bo stood in the doorway, half drunk and swaying. His shirt was open, his boots unlaced. There was a sharpness in his eyes, not just meanness, but something else. Something darker. "I've been thinking," he slurred, stepping closer, "this place could use a woman who knows her place." Nora Bell didn't flinch. She placed the ladle down. Bo reached out, hand clumsy. The crack of the spoon across his knuckles echoed like a gunshot. he yelped, stumbling back, cradling his hand. Try again, Nora Bell said, voice ice. I'll aim for the teeth. The door behind him creaked open. Silas stood there, face unreadable. Snow clung to his shoulders. Bo lowered his gaze and slunk out. No apology. No words. Silas didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he stepped forward, took the ladle, tasted the stew. He nodded once. Good work, he muttered. Then he left, the door shutting quietly behind him. That night Nora Bell couldn't sleep. Her heart wouldn't slow. The cold didn't help, but it was the look in Silas's eyes she kept seeing, the flicker of approval, the absence of pity. She wasn't sure which felt more dangerous. Later, she found herself in the barn with Luis, tending to a horse that had thrown its shoe in the snow. His movements were careful, his touch firm. She watched the way he calmed the mare, how his silence spoke more than words ever could. She handed him a cloth for the blood on his knuckles. He nodded, grateful. Why don't you speak much? She asked. Luis glanced up, eyes steady. Spoken words don't feed horses, he replied quietly. She almost smiled. As the days pressed on, the storm gave no reprieve. Supplies ran lower. Nora Bell rationed flour by the spoonful. She sliced jerky into slivers, made it stretch with boiled barley. The men stopped complaining. Even Bo ate in silence, eyes never meeting hers. One morning, a rider returned from town, barely clinging to his saddle. He'd gone for bullets, medicine, and word, any word, but came back with nothing but a frostbitten cheek and stories of other ranches being raided. Cattle gone. Smoke on the horizon. Bandits, maybe. Or deserters turned wolves. No one knew for sure. Silas doubled the watches. Luis took midnight shift. Bo the one before. Nora Bell watched them from the kitchen window as they patrolled the perimeters, rifles in hand. She never asked what they saw. She knew by the tightness in their jaws that whatever it wasn't good. One evening, after putting her mother to bed, Nora Bell stepped outside. The wind had slowed. The stars above were sharp and cold. She walked past the bunkhouse, boots crunching softly, and found herself at the edge of the woodshed, staring out at the vast darkness beyond the fence line. Something moved, too fast, too quiet. A flicker of shadow where there should be none. She stepped back, breath caught in her throat. Luis, she called softly. He was beside her in seconds. She pointed. Tracks small, quick, disappearing into the snow. He knelt, touched one. His brow furrowed. Not Comanche, he said. Too light. Not scouts. Maybe boys. Maybe bandits. Why come so close? Luis stood. Testing the edges. That night, Nora Bell bolted the kitchen door. She slept on the cot again, knife tucked beneath her apron, fire burning low. She didn't sleep much. Every sound became a question. Every creak a warning. In the early hours before dawn, Silas came into the cookhouse. He looked tired, more so than usual. His beard was rimmed with frost, his coat hanging heavy on his frame. More coming, he said simply. Snow. And maybe men. She poured him coffee. He didn't thank her. But he drank. I can leave, she offered, surprising even herself. No one asked you to. Not yet. Silas looked at her then, really looked. The firelight caught in his eyes, hollow and deep. You held your ground, he said. That matters. He left with those words, and for once, Nora Bell felt warmer than the fire could explain. When morning came, she rose before the sky changed color. The wind had calmed. For the first time in days, the air smelled of smoke and earth instead of ice. The men came in with wary steps, but their faces had softened. Bo muttered something about the biscuits not being terrible. Luis offered a silent nod as always. Nora Bell dished up each plate with steady hands. She didn't smile, but her chin lifted a fraction. Outside, the snow glistened like diamonds. The storm was not over. But Nora Bell no longer felt like it was winning. The night was unnaturally quiet. No wind. No shifting snow. Just the eerie stillness that comes before something breaks. Nora Bell stood alone on the porch of the cookhouse, arms crossed over her chest, breath fogging in the brittle air. Her eyes swept the tree line beyond the corral, scanning shadows that didn't belong. Silas had left at dusk with 3 ranch hands, heading north to check on a line of cattle that hadn't come back with the rest. He said they'd return before moonrise, but now the stars had taken the sky and still there was no sign. She didn't like it. Behind her, the ranch lay in a tense hush. The men were restless, boots thudding across wooden floors, rifle barrels glinting with oil. No laughter. No cards. Just waiting. Nora Bell turned at the sound of approaching footsteps. Luis emerged from the barn, wrapped in a dark wool coat, a lantern swinging in one hand. He paused beside her and followed her gaze. "Anything?" she asked. He shook his head once. "Something's out there." Her pulse ticked higher. "You think they'll come tonight?" Luis didn't answer. He didn't need to. That afternoon, Luis had found fresh tracks just beyond the ridge. Narrow, quick-stepping, not horsemen but men on foot. Nora Bell had seen them herself. 5, maybe 6 sets. One barefoot, ragged edges in the snow, heading toward Dry Creek like wolves scenting the weak. She hadn't said anything in front of the others. Didn't need panic. But Silas had heard. His jaw had clenched, and he'd taken only his sharpest shooters. Now, hours later, the only noise was the low hum of horses in the barn and the creak of old wood settling beneath snow. Nora Bell stepped back into the kitchen and secured the bolt. The fire was low, casting golden light on the walls. Her mother stirred in the cot, whispering in her fever. Nora Bell wiped her brow gently with a cloth soaked in snowmelt. "He's watching," her mother murmured, eyes fluttering. "Who?" Nora Bell whispered. "The man with silence in his mouth." She froze, then looked toward the door. Luis hadn't moved from the porch. He was still, a statue against the dark, lantern dimmed now to a faint ember. Nora Bell turned back to the fire and stirred the pot. Beans and salt pork again. Enough to last another day, maybe 2. She made herself count the spoons, ration the bread, keep track of everything. Order calmed the panic. Footsteps again. A louder tread. This time not Luis. Bo entered, rifle slung carelessly over one shoulder. His knuckles still bore the faint bruises from their earlier clash. But his face was changed, less cruel, more weathered. He nodded toward her. "You see him?" he asked. "Not yet," Nora Bell replied. Bo hesitated, then leaned against the counter. "We get hit tonight, we'll hold the bunkhouse. But the kitchen's closest to the fence. You got a gun?" She tapped the carving knife on the table. "Sharp enough." Bo actually smiled, brief and crooked. "You've got grit." "I didn't see it at first." "I didn't have it at first," she said, honestly. A few minutes passed in silence. Bo moved to leave but paused at the door. "You make it through this," he said. "You'll have done more than most of us ever did." Then he was gone. Later, just before midnight, Nora Bell stepped back outside. The snow had stilled to a thin glitter. She could hear the faint sound of hooves in the distance. They were back. Torches flickered at the edge of the ranch road, carried by riders returning slow and silent. Silas dismounted first, walked the length of the paddock, and met Luis with a low whisper. Nora Bell couldn't hear the words, but she saw their faces. Grim. Eyes shadowed. Silas finally approached her, face drawn with exhaustion. "They were watching," he said simply. "Didn't move. Didn't run. Just stood in the trees. Like they wanted us to know." "How many?" "Enough." She opened the door for him. He stepped inside, shook off the cold, then turned to face her fully. "This ranch ain't what it used to be," he admitted. "Too many ghosts. Not enough hands." "Then why stay?" she asked. He looked past her, toward the fire. "Because if I leave, everything they died for rots." His voice cracked slightly on the last word. He didn't stay long after that, just long enough to warm his hands over the stove and mutter a quiet, "Thank you," before returning to the dark. The next 2 days passed under a cloud of dread. No attacks came, but signs were everywhere. A chicken coop raided. A fence torn loose. A cow found gutted, untouched for meat, done for cruelty, not hunger. Silas moved like a man bracing for war. Louise slept in 2-hour shift. Norabelle, more out of instinct than strategy, began leaving food out for the others in small batches, ready to grab and go if the time came to run. One night, Louise stayed behind after the rest had eaten. He didn't say why. Norabelle wiped down the table. He sat, watching the fire. "My wife," he said at last, voice low. "She died south of the border. Soldiers took her." Norabelle froze, cloth limp in her hands. "I was gone. Came back too late." She nodded slowly. "Mine died in Tennessee. Union ambush. Wrong road. Wrong hour." He didn't respond, but his eyes met hers. For once, there was no wall between them. Trust, like bread, is built in small pieces. When she moved to sit across from him, she noticed the small gesture. His hand, resting on the table, sliding slightly toward hers before stopping. That night they shared no more words. But Norabelle slept easier. By the third day, a decision had to be made. The ranch couldn't stand another night with just scattered watchmen and half-loaded rifles. Silas called them all into the barn. Men stood huddled around the lantern, steam rising from their breath, nerves drawn taut. "We don't wait anymore," Silas said. "We move first." Louise nodded. Bo grunted in agreement. A plan was made, 2 men at the south ridge, another 2 near the streambed where tracks had been found. Norabelle volunteered to stay in the kitchen, armed with the rifle Silas handed her himself. "You ever fired one?" he asked. "Once," she said. "At a fox." "Did you hit it?" "I scared it." "That'll do." That evening, as she stood watch by the cookhouse window, Norabelle caught her reflection in the glass. The dark eyes, the loose braid, the rifle resting against her shoulder. She barely recognized the woman staring back. Not just older, but harder, sharpened like steel in the fire. She heard a noise outside, just a rustle, but she didn't flinch. When Louise passed by later, rifle in hand, he paused by her window. He didn't knock, just nodded once, his silhouette ghost-like in the snowlight. She nodded back. There were no words left between them, only understanding. The attack didn't come that night, nor the next, but something had shifted. They had stopped waiting, and Norabelle, widow, cook, survivor, no longer felt like prey. She was part of the defense now, and when the time came, she wouldn't run. The sky broke red, a dawn not of peace, but of warning, the kind of red that seared through clouds like a wound refusing to close. Norabelle stood alone in the cookhouse doorway, rifle leaning against the frame, her breath rising in slow plumes. Every instinct in her told her it was coming. Not the cold, not hunger, but something far worse. The night before had been too quiet. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind nature reserves for moments just before violence. Louise had not returned from his midnight patrol. Norabelle had waited, pacing the floor in tight, measured steps, the fire behind her throwing her shadow long and thin across the wall. He was never late. Never without signal. When the first hint of sunlight touched the trees, and still there was no word, she knew. Silas burst through the barn doors just before the ranch woke. His coat was soaked with snow and blood, though none of it seemed to be his. Bo and 2 other hands trailed behind him, faces pale, eyes hollow. "They're close," Silas said grimly. "Louise is gone. Took 3 with him before they dragged him out." Norabelle felt something buckle deep inside her chest. Not pain, exactly, just a sudden emptiness. She didn't speak, just walked back to the stove and poured coffee into 3 mugs. Her hands were steady. The men sipped in silence. The ranch had grown smaller. Not in size, but in spirit, like a breath held too long. "We need to be ready tonight," Silas said, barely above a whisper. Bo set down his cup. "Then we take the fight to them." Silas didn't nod, but he didn't argue either. That afternoon, Norabelle moved with precision. She boiled water, laced it with herbs she'd learned from her mother's old recipes, something that would keep the men alert. She baked hard biscuits, loaded them with salt. Food to last, food to fight on. She scrubbed the floors, not from duty, but instinct. If she was going to defend this place, it had to be clean, hers, claimed. Before dusk, she found herself kneeling by her mother's cot. The fever had passed, leaving only frailty behind. Her eyes fluttered open, thin and glassy. "You're still here," her mother whispered. "I'm always here." Her mother reached for her hand. "He was proud of you. You're James. I can feel it." Nora Bell blinked but said nothing. "You survived what killed others," her mother added, gripping her hand faintly. "You endured." Nora Bell rose slowly, tucking the blanket tighter. "Not done yet." When the sun dropped behind the trees, a silence heavier than any storm settled over the land. The men moved like ghosts, rifles loaded, boots muffled in snow. Nora Bell doused the outside lanterns, keeping the ranch dim. She lit only one lamp in the kitchen, near the back door, as bait. Then she waited. It began just past midnight. A low whistle, the snapping of twigs, then a scream, sharp and strangled. Bo fired first, his rifle cracking through the night. Nora Bell spun toward the noise, saw shadows moving across the yard. 5, 6 more, men in ragged coats with scarves over their faces, knives in their hands, no words, only violence. They came fast. Nora Bell grabbed the boiling pot from the stove, flung it toward the first shape breaching the door. A scream followed, skin and steam colliding. She ducked, pulled the rifle from the wall, fired once. Missed. Fired again. The second bullet struck a man in the thigh. He went down, howling. Another crashed through the window, grabbing her arm. She swung the butt of the rifle into his temple, sending him sprawling into the shelves. Jars shattered. Flour exploded. She didn't stop. She ran outside, into the chaos. Fire lit the barn. Someone had thrown oil. Horses screamed. Men fought near the bunkhouse, shadows tangled in blood and snow. Nora Bell spotted Silas near the paddock, fending off 2 attackers. She raced forward, grabbed a shovel from the fence post, and swung it with all the force she had. One man fell. Silas shot the other point blank. "You should be inside," he snapped. "I am done hiding," she growled. Together, they pushed forward. Bo was bleeding from a knife wound to the ribs but still fighting, teeth bared. He saw Nora Bell and gave her a nod, a flicker of something like pride. More attackers came, 12 in total, maybe more. But the ranchers were ready. One by one, the intruders fell. Some fled. A few never got back up. And then it was over. Not with a bang, but with silence. Broken snow. Scattered bodies. The taste of smoke and iron in the air. Nora Bell stood in the center of it all, covered in ash, blood, and sweat. Her hands trembled now, after the need for stillness had passed. Her hair hung loose, soaked through with melted snow. Her eyes scanned the horizon. Nothing moved. The attack had failed. But the cost hung heavy. At dawn, they buried the dead, 2 ranch hands, 3 attackers. No words, just dirt and shovels and the sting of grief. Luis's body was never recovered. But his coat was found, torn and bloodied, near the north ridge. Nora Bell took it in silence and folded it neatly in the cookhouse, laying it across the empty cot. Later, as the men sat hunched by the fire, Nora Bell stepped outside. The sky was clear now, pale blue with streaks of gold. Birds had returned, timid and uncertain. She walked past the barn, past the bunkhouse, to the edge of the woods, where the wind hummed low through the trees. She stood there, unmoving. Behind her, she heard footsteps. Silas. He didn't speak. He just stood beside her. "They won't be back," he said finally. "No," she agreed. "But others will come. Different names. Same hunger." Silas looked at her, truly looked. The woman who had once stepped off a wagon in mourning now stood straight-backed and unshaken, her skin marked by fire and frost, her eyes sharper than steel. "You saved this place," he said. "I didn't do it alone." Silas hesitated. "You could stay. If you want. Not as a cook. Nora Bell turned to face him. As what then? His voice was low. As someone who belongs here. She didn't answer right away. She looked back at the horizon. This land doesn't care about belonging, she said. You claim it. Or it buries you. He nodded slowly. Then claim it with me. A long silence stretched between them. Then she stepped forward, past him, toward the ranch. She didn't look back. That evening, Nora Bell baked again for the first time in days. Not out of necessity, but out of defiance. Biscuits, golden and hot. She placed one beside her mother's cot, another on the windowsill for no one in particular, and a third on the porch railing beneath the stars. She sat outside as the night fell, rifle resting nearby, the wind finally soft again. And she whispered to the dark, just loud enough for the silence to carry it. I'm still here. She had endured the storm. Now she would build something in its place. She didn't come to be a hero, only to survive. But in surviving, she found strength no one expected, not even herself. If Nora Bell's story moved you, if her quiet fire, her unyielding will, and the brutal beauty of her journey struck something within you, then don't let it end here. Like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful frontier tales, stories of resilience, sacrifice, and the quiet victories that shape us. This land remembers the brave. Be part of the journey.